On October 31st, 2025, the Miami Dolphins shook up the front office. General Manager Chris Grier and the franchise mutually agreed to part ways. It was the sort of mid-season seismic move that smells of both accountability and panic. The owner deciding change can't wait, and it landed right before the trade deadline like an audible in the red zone. Reuters owner Stephen M. Ross put it plainly in the team statement. He decided a change was necessary to get the organization moving in the right direction. That's important because Ross is the guy who writes the checks and the narratives. When an owner says change now, it usually means the clock on patience has run out. Facebook.com. Here's the immediate housekeeping. Champ Kelly, a familiar NFL executive with previous interim GM experience, steps into the front office breach as the interim general manager while the team begins a search for a permanent replacement. That move matters because the interim GM is suddenly the deal maker who will steer the club through the next 2 weeks of roster decisions, waiver wire calls, and the trade deadline gauntlet. Reuters, and yes, the elephant in the room, head coach Mike McDaniel is staying, at least for now. Multiple reports citing league sources confirmed McDaniel will remain the Miami Dolphins head coach through the remainder of the 2025 season. That's the central tension of this whole story. The GM gone, the coach spared, and a franchise to ask whether this is a surgical fix or a public relations stopgap. ESPN.com. Let's unpack why this all matters. The Dolphins sit at 2-7. That kind of record at this point of the year isn't just bad luck. It's a pattern that forces ownership to reassess competence across scouting, roster construction, injury mitigation, and coaching. Chris Grier had been with the franchise for decades and was GM since 2016. His departure is not just a personnel change, it's a cultural rupture. NFL.com. But why keep Mike McDaniel? The simplest explanation is this: timing. You don't always drive a car while changing the engine in the middle of a highway. The team still has a season to finish, and firing a head coach right before a playoff push that's already not happening is messy. Plus, McDaniel has a track record, quick offensive innovation, playoff appearances, and a relationship with owner Stephen Ross that has weathered ups and downs. For now, Ross appears to be betting that replacing the GM gives Miami the administrative reboot it wants without detonating the coaching staff midstream. So that doesn't make McDaniel's job safe indefinitely. In public, he's got the leash. Privately, the math is straightforward. If Miami doesn't show clear improvement, the next logical cut might be the head coach. Remember, owners frequently change GMs first because they're the catalogers of roster construction. If that doesn't fix the issue, they move to the coaching staff. For McDaniel, surviving the rest of this season buys time, but it's time on a borrowed calendar. Sigh. Now consider the short-term chessboard. The trade deadline is a 2-week sprint away. With Champ Kelly temporarily in charge, the Dolphins' calls to other teams will carry a different tone. Interim GMs often have narrower mandates. Don't mortgage the future for a marginal upgrade, but do fix glaring holes if the price and fit make sense. In practice, that could mean packaging a mid-round pick for a controllable veteran or flipping depth pieces to shore up an offensive line, the secondary, or both. The next 2 weeks will reveal whether Miami is buying or retooling. From a roster perspective, the problems are visible. The offensive line has been patchwork. Injuries have hit key pieces. The secondary has shown vulnerabilities. Those are the things that point to the GM's remit: drafting, free agent allocation, and the long-term health plan. If the interim regime is smart, the ideal approach is conservative, surgical trades that add immediate help without sacrificing the 2026 salary cap health. That's easier said than done, of course. SI, let's talk optics and narrative. Fans and media were already talking about Mike McDaniel on the hot seat. When Chris Grier was the one who got let go first, it stoked an argument heard across sports talk radio. The brother gets fired first. Whether that phrasing came from a place of righteous critique or rhetorical heat, it's a reminder that decisions like this are seen through social and cultural lenses, not just spreadsheets. Expect commentators to keep the heat on McDaniel, even if the front office change was framed as a mutual split. Awful announcing. There's also a longer-term strategic question. What direction does Stephen Ross want for the franchise? Do you hire a GM aligned with McDaniel's offensive vision, prioritizing speed, creativity, and architectural bravery? Or do you bring in a conservative architect who emphasizes line play, defensive stoutness, and roster depth? The choice of a permanent GM will signal the philosophical reset Ross and the ownership group intend. It's a hiring decision that could shape Miami's draft targets, free agent posture, and coaching hires for years. SI for Mike McDaniel. The practical playbook for the next 6 weeks is obvious. Coax wins, protect optics, and stabilize the locker room. Show the owner that the team is responsive to adjustments, that players are still bought into the scheme, and that the coach isn't the reason the roster is underperforming. If McDaniel can somehow rally Miami into respectable play or at least steady improvement, he increases his odds of sticking around into 2026. If the slide continues, the logic of replacing the coach will grow louder. SI, here's what to watch in the immediate fallout. 1. The Dolphins' trade deadline activity. Big moves will show an aggressive plan. Conservative moves will show a preservation mindset. 2. Champ Kelly's first public statements and personnel decisions. Those will reveal whether he's a caretaker or an architect. And 3. How the locker room reacts. If players publicly rally behind McDaniel, that helps the coach's cause. Those 3 signals will tell us whether this was a meaningful reset or just a headline. Reuters' final thought. Firing a general manager mid-season is a rare, dramatic gesture. It's an owner's way of saying we're starting over. But keeping the head coach is an equal bit of theater. It implies either loyalty to a vision or a temporary pause before a bigger purge. For Dolphins fans, the immediate emotion is relief that the team will try a different direction without decapitating the entire operation. For everyone else watching the league, it's a reminder that NFL seasons are messy and power moves often come in half steps, big enough to get attention, small enough to leave options open. Reuters picture this image to close: the owner in the front office, a brief handshake with a departing GM, an interim GM scanning the roster, and Mike McDaniel walking back to the locker room with a "for now" tacked to his headline. That's the frame. Messy, human, and very NFL. The trade deadline will show whether this was the start of a rebuild or simply the league's version of rearranging deck chairs. Either way, Miami's story is far from closed. What would you do if the person you trusted to steer the ship got tossed a reef of bad luck? Broken O-lines, a shaky secondary, and a string of plays that look more like bloopers than mistakes. And the owner still tells you, not yet. Keep steering. That's the cliff Miami is on right now, and Mike McDaniel is standing in the middle of it with a life preserver and a very complicated smile. Picture it. A season that began with whispers of genius. Innovative schemes, splashy wins, now limps along at 2-7. The front office shakes. Chris Grier, the man who built that roster and took the heat for every draft pick, is gone. Cameras swivel. Pundits sharpen their knives, fans write obituaries for the playbook, and then in an almost cinematic twist, owner Stephen Ross steps in and says, "We're not firing McDaniel this year." It's a line that reads like loyalty or like paralysis, depending on how loudly you feel the losses. Here's the tight truth everybody's trying to swallow. Coaching is choreography and personnel. Move the dancers, and the show changes. McDaniel has always been the kind of coach who asks his roster to perform complicated steps, pre-snap motions, creative run concepts, deceptive protections. When your offensive line can't hold a mirror up to those moves, the choreography falls apart. That's not always the coach's fault. It's also not a clean defense for him. Coaches shape culture, they influence personnel choices, and sometimes they push for players who fit their scheme. But the engine that signs the checks and drafts the players is the GM. With Grier gone, the narrative shifts. Whose plan is this mess? And because sports are emotional, not just analytic, this decision feels like an emotional vote as much as a tactical one. Ross's public affection for McDaniel isn't a secret. He once treated McDaniel like a prodigy, let him disrupt, let him tinker, let him invent. That same affection now looks risky to some. Keep a coach who's underwhelming while the roster tilts downward, or cut him loose and invite an entirely new direction under the pressure of public opinion? Ross chose the former for now. It's a bet that stability, not a midseason bloodletting, serves the franchise best. The optics of keeping McDaniel are twofold. On one hand, The team avoids the chaos of a midseason teardown. No interim coach, no sudden philosophical shift, no immediate draft panic. On the other hand, every loss becomes a referendum. Fans chant for change, analysts write timelines about contract years and cap implications, and each miscue becomes another argument for why not now. The next few games will be loud, not quiet. Now, let's not pretend McDaniel's hands are clean. Calls to go all in on creative offense can make a team play outside its strengths. If your offensive line is a sieve and your secondary keeps falling asleep on the back end, audacity alone won't save you. McDaniel's offense demands timing and cohesion. Without it, even brilliant play calling looks like noise. That's on him too. He's got to adapt, to find ways to simplify, to coach fundamentals when the talent isn't performing to the ideal. The hallmark of great coaches is that they can morph their philosophy to their players' reality. That's the test he now faces in front of a national audience. There's a human subplot here that people forget in the spreadsheet noise. Coaches build relationships. McDaniel's players bought into his culture. How many plays ended as highlight reel improvisations because the team trusted the structure he installed? When an owner says, "We'll keep him for now," it sends a message into the locker room. Hold on, the plan is still intact. That can stabilize a team on the verge of unraveling, but it can also prolong the agony if the plan is flawed. The choice is a double-edged sword. Let me be blunt. Firing a GM and keeping a coach is an odd 1-2 punch. It signals blame shifted toward the architects of the roster while the face of the scheme stays. For the incoming decision makers, general managers, personnel chiefs, scouts, this is both an opportunity and a headache. If you inherit job control while the coach